The night Denji died for the third time that week, he was eating a piece of bread. It was stale, half-burned at the edges, and tasted faintly of the oil rag it had been wrapped in, but he chewed it like a man who had finally found a piece of heaven hidden inside a slum. Around him, the city of Tokyo glowed in that tired electric way only late nights know, where every neon sign hums a little softer and every shadow seems to lean in to listen. Makima had given him an address, a target, and a single sentence of warning. Something old, she had said. Something we have not seen before. Be careful, Denji. He had nodded the way a hungry dog nods at a leash, half listening, more interested in whether there would be food after. He always thought about food after. Sometimes during, sometimes instead of breathing. The devil was waiting for him in an empty intersection where the traffic lights still blinked red, 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 like a heartbeat that had forgotten how to slow down. It did not have a shape, not really. It looked the way a wound looks when you stare at it too long, the way a memory bleeds when you try to hold it still. Denji felt Pachita stir inside his chest, that small warm pulse that always meant trouble, and he grinned, because trouble was the only language he had ever spoken fluently. He pulled the cord. The chainsaws roared out of his skull and his arms in a spray of blood and laughter, and for a moment he was the loudest thing in the world. He charged. The devil opened. And the sky split. It was not an explosion. It was worse than that. Explosions end. This was a tearing, slow and patient, the way old fabric finally surrenders along a seam. A line of red opened above the buildings, and behind that line there was no Tokyo, no stars, no city lights blinking back at themselves in puddles. There was only a darkness so complete that it seemed to be drinking the world. Cars vanished. Street lamps tipped sideways and were gone. A whole apartment block folded inward, swallowed in a single breath, and the people inside it did not have time to scream. Denji did not have time to think. He only had time to fall. He fell through cold. He fell through silence. He fell through something that felt like memory and something else that felt like teeth. And then, with a kind of cruelty that only the universe can manage when it is bored, he simply stopped falling and was lying on his back in tall, wet grass. For a long while he did not move. The sky above him was the wrong color. Not blue, not black, but a bruised gray that looked the way pain feels in the morning. There were no neon signs. There were no horns, no train announcements, no distant murmur of a million strangers living a million small lives. There was only wind and the smell of pine, and somewhere, far away, the sound of crows speaking in a language he did not want to understand. He sat up slowly. His chainsaws were quiet. Pachita was quiet. The world was quiet, and that was the part that finally scared him. Then he saw the smoke. It rose from beyond a low ridge, thin and black, the way smoke rises only from things that were never meant to burn. Houses, maybe. Denji stood, brushing dirt from his pants the way a child brushes off a scolding, and started walking toward it because walking toward smoke was the only instinct he had left. As he climbed the ridge, he told himself this was just another devil dimension. Some new trick, some new test. Makima would explain it later. He would get paid. He would eat something better than bread. Then night fell. It fell the way a blade falls. One moment there was a bruised gray sky, and the next moment there was nothing, and out of that nothing came shapes. Wings that were not wings. Mouths where mouths should not be. Below him, in a small ring of huts and torchlight, the screaming began, and somewhere inside Denji's chest, a forgotten heart pulled the cord for him. The first thing Denji learned in this new world was that running toward screams did not make you a hero. It only made you the next thing in the room with the screaming. He arrived at the village while the apostles were still feeding. He did not know that word yet. He did not know any of the words. He only saw long limbs bending the wrong way, and faces that had grown too many eyes, and a child being lifted into the air the way a man lifts an apple before biting. Something in Denji that did not need explanation pulled the cord, and his head opened, and the chainsaws sang, and for a few minutes the night belonged to him. When it was over, he stood in a circle of bodies that had once been monsters, and a smaller circle of bodies that had once been people. And he was breathing the way a furnace breathes. Blood ran down his arms. Blood ran down his chin. Blood, he was beginning to suspect, was simply the weather here. The survivors had locked themselves inside the chapel at the far end of the village, and when he walked toward the door, he heard them praying louder, faster, the way men pray when they have decided that prayer is the last weapon they own. He knocked. Nobody opened. He sat down on the chapel steps with his back against the wood and listened to them sob through the cracks. After a while he laughed. It was a small, tired laugh, the kind that does not ask for company. He had saved them, and they thought he was the next mouth at the door. In Tokyo that would have hurt. Here, in this place where the air itself seemed to taste like grief, it only felt familiar. He had spent his whole childhood being feared by people he was trying to feed. In the morning, an old woman came out with a piece of bread. She did not look at him. She placed it on the lowest step, made a sign across her chest that he did not recognize, and went back inside without a word. Denji picked up the bread, turned it over in his hand, and grinned. Stale, half-burned at the edges. He took a bite, and for one long moment, despite the smoke and the wrong sky and the shapes still hanging from the trees, he felt almost at home. That was how he learned the rules of the New World. He walked from village to village, from ruin to ruin, trading violence for crusts of bread and hollow stairs. He kept count of nothing because counting required hope, and hope here was something that got you killed in your sleep. He asked questions in a language nobody understood, and he listened to answers in a language he did not need to understand, because grief sounds the same in every tongue. He met farmers who had buried their own children that morning and were already turning the soil for next year's wheat. He met soldiers without armies who drank from broken cups and stared at fires as if waiting for someone inside the flames to finally call them home. He met priests who blessed him with shaking hands, and bandits who tried to rob him and ran when his head split open into steel. He killed when he had to. He ate when he could. He slept badly, which was an improvement. The strange thing, the thing he turned over in his mind the way a child turns a stone, was that this world did not break him. He had expected it to. He had spent enough nights in Tokyo deciding that one more bad day would finish him off. But Berserk's world was not a bad day. It was a long, slow forever of bad days, and somehow forever was easier to carry than tomorrow. He started helping people without being asked. He told himself it was for the food. He told himself it was for somewhere warm to sleep. He told himself a lot of things, and the wind, which had heard every lie ever told, did not bother to argue. He met the swordsman on a road that was not really a road anymore. It had been one once, the kind of cobbled trade route that connects places where men used to believe in tomorrow. Now it was a strip of broken stone running between two black forests, and along its length were the leftovers of an ambush. Wagons turned on their sides. Horses pulled apart in ways horses are not supposed to come apart. And in the center of it all, like a single black nail driven into the world, a man with a sword that should not have been a sword. Denji saw the blade first. It was not a weapon. It was a slab of iron the size of a coffin lid, dragged behind a figure in armor so dark it seemed to drink the daylight. The man's hair was the color of old ash. One of his eyes was missing, covered by a strip of cloth. The other was the worst eye Denji had ever seen, and he had grown up looking into mirrors. They saw each other across the bodies. Denji raised one hand the way a child waves at a stranger and grinned. The swordsman did not wave back. He shifted his grip on the impossible blade and watched, and Denji felt, for the first time since arriving, that he was in the presence of something that might actually be able to kill him. Then the trees moved. Out of the dark wood came a thing that had once been a noble. Denji could tell because pieces of velvet still clung to its sides between the joints of bone. Its mouth was a horizontal slit running from shoulder to shoulder, and its laughter was the laughter of someone who has remembered, very late, that they were never human at all. It came down the road on 6 legs, and Denji pulled the cord, and the swordsman raised his blade, and the world stopped pretending to be quiet. They fought separately at first. Denji went high, screaming, chainsaws biting through chitin like it was old fruit. Guts went low, the great sword carving slow arcs that ended in detonations of meat. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. The apostle shrieked something in a language that tasted like rust, and for one terrible second it understood that it was going to die, and that nobody in any heaven was going to mourn it. When it was over, they stood on opposite sides of the corpse, breathing. The swordsman spoke first. His voice was lower than Denji had expected and quieter. He said only, "What are you?" Denji wiped blood off his face with the back of his sleeve, considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, and answered, "Hungry." The swordsman did not laugh, but the corner of his mouth did something that in a kinder life might have been the ancestor of a smile. He told Denji his name was Guts. He told Denji to leave. He said the words the way a man reads from a list he has read too many times. People near him died. People who walked beside him became names on stones, and then not even stones, because there was nobody left to carve them. He said it without drama, the way a doctor tells you about the weather inside your own lungs. Then he turned, shouldered the great sword, and started walking. Denji watched him for a moment. Then he jogged to catch up. Guts did not stop. He did not look down. He only said, "I told you to leave." Denji shrugged, hands in his pockets, chainsaw blood drying in his hair. He said, "Bad Luck and me are old friends." He said, "Besides, you look like you could use somebody loud." The swordsman did not answer. But he did not chase him off either, and in Berserk's world, that was the closest thing to an invitation that anyone ever received. They walked together as the sun went down. Two shapes on a ruined road. One carrying a sword too heavy for the world. One carrying a heart too small to know better. Denji noticed the mark on the third night. They were camped at the edge of a dead orchard, the trees standing in rows like soldiers who had forgotten the order to fall. Guts had taken off his armor to clean a wound, and on the side of his neck Denji saw it. A small shape, no bigger than a thumbprint, raised against the skin. It was bleeding, slowly, the way a stone bleeds in a dream. Denji asked about it the way he asked about everything, with his mouth full and no manners. Guts looked at him for a long moment over the fire, and then he answered, because there was no point in lying to a creature that had already seen the worst of him. He called it the brand of sacrifice. He said the word sacrifice the way other men said the word grave. He told Denji about a friend who had been more than a friend, a brother who had been more than a brother, and a single night under a red moon when that brother had stepped over a line drawn in the meat of the world and become a god. He told him about the others who had died at that table. He told him, briefly and without shaking, about a woman whose name he did not say out loud, because saying it out loud was a wound he had decided not to keep reopening for strangers. He said that the brand called things to him. That fate itself, if there was such a thing, had decided he was meat for a longer table. Denji listened. He did not interrupt. When Guts was done, Denji poked the fire with a stick and said, "That sucks." Guts almost laughed. It was the first almost in a long time. That night, Denji did not sleep. He lay on his back and stared at the bruised gray sky and thought about brands and tables and brothers who become gods. And he thought about a small red devil who had once lived inside his chest and had given everything, every single piece of itself, so that he could keep walking. He pressed his hand against his ribs. He thought he could still feel a heartbeat there that was not his. Pochita had not spoken since he arrived, but Pochita had not left either. And in a world where fate was a thing that hunted people across continents, Denji decided, quietly, that whatever was inside him was not a brand. It was a promise. The creatures came the next night as Guts had warned. They came out of the river first, things with the bodies of men and the heads of fish that had learned to scream. Then out of the orchard, things that had been crows once, before some long, wrong winter had taught them to grow hands. They were not the worst monsters Denji had seen here. That was the part that frightened him. They were ordinary. They were a Tuesday in this world. Guts fought the way a glacier fights, slow and total. Denji fought the way of fire fights, everywhere at once. When it was finally over and the orchard was quiet again, they sat back to back against a dead tree. And Denji asked the question that had been growing inside him like a tooth. He asked, "Why do you keep going?" He did not say it loudly. He did not say it like a hero in a story. He said it the way a tired child asks a parent why the night has to be so long. The fire snapped. Somewhere far away, an owl that was probably not an owl made a sound that was probably not a call. Guts did not look at him. He looked at his hands, the great gauntleted hand and the iron one beneath it. And after a long time he answered. He said, "Because stopping is dying." He said, "And I have already buried too many people to give that bastard one more." That was all. There was no speech. There was no light in his eye. There was only a man telling the truth in the smallest possible number of words. And Denji, who had spent his whole life chasing toast and breasts and small clean dreams that the world kept stepping on, sat with that sentence and turned it over the way he turned bread in his hands. He understood it. He understood it the way a starving man understands a door. You did not fight in this world because you would win. You fought because the people you had loved, even briefly, even badly, deserved a witness. You fought because somebody had to be the last sound in the room. Inside his chest, where Pachita slept, something faint pulsed once. Like a yes. Like a heartbeat remembering its own name. The refugee fort stood on a cliff above a cold river, and on the night the apostles came for it, there were 370 living people inside its walls. Denji counted them. He had never counted people before in his life. He sat on the stone parapet with his legs swinging over the drop and counted heads in the courtyard below, lips moving, fingers ticking, like a child practicing a song. Old men with spears that were really sharpened broom handles. Women with babies tied to their chests with strips of curtain. A boy who could not have been older than 10, holding a kitchen knife as if the kitchen knife were the last good thing in the world. 370. He said the number out loud. Guts, beside him, did not look up from sharpening the great sword. He only said, "Do not get attached." Denji grinned. He was already attached. He had been attached since the first piece of stale bread. The apostles came at moonrise. They did not run. They did not need to. There were dozens of them, and they walked up the slope the way a tide walks up a beach, certain of arrival. At their head was a thing that had once been a baron, judging by the crown still fused into its skull. Its mouth opened in 3 directions. Its laugh was the laugh of a creature that had spent decades practicing the joke of human suffering and was still, somehow, finding it funny. The cannons on the walls fired first. Old iron throats coughed fire into the dark, and pieces of monster came back down in smoking arcs. For a moment the defenders cheered, the way men cheer when they have forgotten, briefly, the size of the night. Then the gates burst inward, because in this world cannons were never enough, and the courtyard became a mouth. Guts went first, because that was the only way Guts knew how to enter a room. The great sword swung, and a thing the size of a horse came apart in the middle, and his armored boots planted themselves between a wall of bodies and the boy with the kitchen knife. Denji went second, screaming with delight because he was finally home. Fighting was the one language this world and his old one shared, and for the first time since he had fallen out of the sky, he was being asked to speak it loudly. The chainsaw sang. He did not stop. He did not slow. He carved a corridor through the middle of the courtyard, and the apostles, who had spent their long lives believing themselves to be the predators in every room, learned, briefly, what it felt like to be the meal. He laughed. He laughed the way only the truly tired laugh, with his whole chest, with blood in his teeth, with an old red devil pulsing somewhere behind his ribs in time with the engines. An apostle caught him across the back with a claw the size of a door. He fell. He got up. He fell again. He got up again. There was a moment near the broken well in the middle of the courtyard, when he was on his knees in a puddle of his own blood, and the Baron with 3 mouths was leaning down to take his head, and Denji looked past it and saw the boy with the kitchen knife still standing in the doorway, still alive, still watching. Denji smiled at him. It was not a brave smile. It was a stupid, tired, grinning smile, the kind a brother gives a younger brother before doing something both of them will remember. Then he pulled the cord one more time. What came out of his head this time was not a chainsaw. It was every chainsaw. It was a noise that did not belong to any single throat, a roar that the walls of the fort caught and held and gave back doubled. The Baron's 3 mouths opened to scream and found instead that they were already in pieces. Denji did not remember the next minute. He only remembered afterward kneeling in a circle of silence with steam rising off his shoulders, and Guts standing behind him with the great sword planted in the stone like a flag. The defenders stared. They had seen monsters before. They had watched their fathers die in front of them. They had buried their own names. But they had never, not in any of their lives, seen a monster fight for them. Not for gold, not for glory, not for a kingdom. Just for a courtyard full of strangers and one boy with a kitchen knife. The boy walked out into the wreckage. He stopped in front of Denji. He held out the knife, hilt first, the way you offer a sword to a king in a story. Denji laughed, took the knife, and used it to cut a piece of bread he found in his pocket. He gave half to the boy. They ate together, sitting in the blood while the sun, very slowly and without apology, began to come up. In the days after the battle, the fort learned how to breathe again. It learned slowly. That was the only way anything was learned in this world. The dead were carried out in carts that creaked the way old prayers creak, and the wounded were laid in rows in the chapel, and the living, who were always the strangest of the three groups, began the long, quiet work of pretending that tomorrow was a thing that existed. Walls were patched with whatever wood the river had spat up. Roofs were rethatched with grass that smelled faintly and unfairly of summer. Children, who in this world were really only small adults with louder voices, began running again in the courtyard, and their running sounded, to anyone who had ears for it, like the first music the place had heard in a year. Denji helped. He did not announce it. He did not make speeches. He simply woke up one morning, looked at a half-collapsed shed where an old woman was trying to lift a beam by herself, and walked over and lifted it for her. She thanked him in a language he still did not speak, and he nodded the way men nod when they have decided that words are too expensive. After that it became a habit. He carried water from the river. He chopped wood with a blunt axe and laughed when the handle broke. He let small children touch the cord on his chest and pretend, very seriously, that they were starting an engine. When they squealed and ran away, he chased them slowly, the way an older brother chases. The fort began, without quite admitting it, to call him by name. In the evenings he sat with Guts on the wall. They did not always talk. Mostly they watched the sky go from gray to black, and the river underneath go from silver to nothing, and the small fires inside the fort flicker on one by one like stars deciding to come down for the night. Sometimes Guts would say something short. Sometimes Denji would say something stupid. Mostly there was the silence of two men who had stopped needing to fill silence, because silence in their company was no longer a threat. One night, Denji said, "I used to want a girlfriend." Guts did not laugh. Guts almost never laughed, but he turned his head, very slightly, and waited. Denji said, "I used to want a girlfriend and a soft bed, and toast with butter, and to touch a girl's chest just once before I died." He said it the way a man reads a list of dreams from a piece of paper that is too old to be embarrassing anymore. He said, "And I still want those things. But you know." He stopped. He looked down into the courtyard where the boy with the kitchen knife, whose name turned out to be a small, clumsy word that meant something like little owl, was teaching a younger child how to braid grass. He said, "But I think I want this more." Guts did not answer for a long time. When he did, he only said, "Then protect it. As long as you can." He said it the way a man hands another man a torch. And Denji, who had spent most of his life chasing dreams the size of a sandwich, accepted the torch without comment, because he understood, finally, what it was for. That night he dreamed of Pakita. The little red devil was sitting on his chest the way it used to in the old shed, eyes half closed, tail curled, breathing the slow breath of something content. It did not say anything. It did not need to. It simply leaned forward and pressed its small forehead against Denji's, the way it had done on the night a hungry boy had first promised to share his life with a hungry monster, and Denji woke up with his cheeks wet and his ribs full of a sound that might have been a heartbeat, or might have been an engine, and was, in either case, his. He left in the morning, the way men leave in stories that do not want to be stories yet. He did not say goodbye to most of them. He said it to the boy. He said it to the old woman who had once put bread on a chapel step. He said it, in his way, to Guts, by walking up to him at the gate, punching him once in the shoulder hard enough to bruise an ordinary man, and grinning. Guts looked at him for a long time. Then he reached into a pouch at his belt and took out a single dried strip of meat, the kind soldiers carry when they have decided that hunger is a road of its own, and pressed it into Denji's hand. "Take care of yourself, devil," he said. "Try not to die in anything stupid." Denji laughed and said, "No promises." And then, because he could not help himself, he added, "You too, old man. You too." He walked out of the fort with a strip of meat in his pocket and a kitchen knife tied to his belt by a piece of curtain. The world did not change for him. The sky stayed bruised. The forest stayed black. Somewhere out beyond the horizon, four faces in a place without time were still watching. And the brand on a man's neck was still bleeding slowly. And a god who had once been a friend was still smiling his cold, beautiful smile at the long table where fate ate its meals. Denji knew none of this in detail. He felt all of it in the air, the way an animal feels weather. He walked anyway. He walked into villages where people had given up the habit of opening their doors, and he made them laugh, badly, by falling on his face in the mud. He walked into ruins where children had forgotten what hands felt like that did not strike them, and he carried them on his shoulders until they fell asleep. He fought when he had to. He ate when he could. He slept under skies that wanted him dead, and he refused simply the way a stone refuses to give them the satisfaction. The story started without his permission. In one valley, they said a screaming devil with two heads had eaten an apostle whole. In another, they said a red-eyed monster had carried a wounded woman 3 days through snow without asking for anything but bread. In another, they said he was a saint. In another, a demon. In another, a joke. He did not care. He had stopped caring about names a long time ago, somewhere between Tokyo and the orchard. And on quiet nights, when the wind moved through the pines the way old hands move through hair, the people of that cursed world sometimes thought they heard very far away a small mechanical sound, a cord pulling, an engine catching, a heart stubborn and stupid and entirely human refusing one more time to stop. Somewhere beneath the endless darkness of Berserk's world, the sound of chainsaws still echoed. And somewhere inside that sound, hope very quietly kept walking.